know the saying, if you don't like Seiko dive watches by the time you're 20, you have no heart, and if you don't like Seiko dive watches by the time you're 40, you have no brain. Abraham Lincoln said that. Good dude, big dive watch collector. I think Seiko watches, especially Seiko dive watches, I think they're foundational and formative for a lot of watch enthusiasts. You can start a mechanical watch collection for a relatively small amount of money relative to the amount that you will inevitably spend later. You will look back on the $300 you spent on a Seiko 5 with nostalgia and a chuckle and a little regret probably. And here's one of the watches that will get you to that point. This is the SPB453, a dive watch from Seiko's Prospex line. This SPB453 was announced in March of 2024 along with a blue 451 and a gold accented 455. And I'll bet that there are more variations on the way. That's one of the things I've always loved about Seiko. They never let you get bored. Frustrated, yes. Confused, sometimes. Tired, always tired. But never bored. This watch is another modern interpretation of the Seiko 62 Mas. Okay, the 62 Mas was Seiko's first dive watch. It came out in 1965 and had 150 meters of water resistance, which was and still is plenty of water resistance. Stop pretending that you need more. The 62 part and 62 Mas referred to the caliber of the movement inside the watch, the 6217 movement. And the Mas part, I don't know if I believe this, but it's said that it's a kind of portmanteau for automatic and self-dater. Seems like a stretch, but I do know that there are plenty of heavy self-daters in the watch community, so maybe that's what it's referring to. You know what I'm saying. Anyway, 62 Mas. A few years ago, Seiko started making modern reissues of the 62 Mas. Reissues and watches that were inspired by it, and they haven't stopped, and they won't stop until we stop. You know how watch companies work. When they hit on something that sells, they keep going back to the same mine until there's nothing left. See also Tissot PRX and Omega Moon watches. This SPB 451 is another gem from that 62 Mas mine. And I'm saying gem because I do like this watch, and also it costs about the same as a mediocre round cut half carat diamond. The steel case is 40 millimeters across, 13 millimeters thick, and 46.5 millimeters long. It has 20 millimeter lugs with drilled lug holes. It has 300 meters of water resistance and weighs about 168 grams in total, about 160 grams size for my 7-inch wrist. It has an aluminum bezel insert, a sapphire crystal, and the steel of the watch uses Seiko's super hard coating. The watch uses the 6R55 movement and has 70 hours of power reserve. Now let's talk about how this wears on my 7-inch wrist. For those of you with imperfect wrists that are either larger or smaller than mine, there's only so much I can do for you, but I think at 40 millimeters by 46 millimeters long, most of you will find that this size works really well. I would guess that from 6 inches to 8 inches, you're going to like how this wears. And at 13 millimeters thick, I know I have a bit of a psychological line. As soon as something hits 13 millimeters, there's like some major difference in my mind between 13 and 12.9. But really, 13 millimeters is kind of slim for a dive watch with this depth rating. And with this latest generation of the 62 Mas inspired dive watches, Seiko actually slimmed the watches a bit from 13.2 to 13 millimeters. Again, 0.2 millimeters isn't going to make a big difference, but they also slimmed the design of the case so the mid case looks even slimmer than a 0.2 millimeter reduction. So with the size, which I think is great, the main issue for some people is going to be the weight. 160-ish grams it's mostly on par with other 300-meter dive watches made of steel, and it's hefty. And that's where the owner of this watch, who is not me yet, took things into their own hands. The owner replaced the original Seiko Clasp with this $30 clasp from Strapcode. I'm not in contact with Strapcode, and I think I might have owned a bracelet from them years ago for my turtle, but for $30, this clasp seems pretty good. And yes, the owner of this watch did put the clasp on backwards. I guess they'll find out when they watch this video. 2 reasons they replaced the clasp. First, the original Seiko clasp has only 2 micro adjustment spots. And that's not terrible, but I personally like more adjustability, especially around the holidays, and it's pie season, you guys. What do you want me to do? The other reason for the clasp replacement is that Seiko continues to put this dumb diver's extension thingy on its dive watches. Come on, really, Seiko, save yourself some money. leave the diver extension off the watch and let people who actually want it buy it for like $20. You'll make more money and will be less confused about what this thing is and how it works. Also, please, screws instead of pins. At this point, I've bent more pins than I've bent truths, and that's a lot. Or is it? Anyway, on the wrist, I'd say this is good in the comfort column and great in the looks column. I think this is a super handsome watch. The 40mm size is definitely part of that, but also just the overall design. The case kind of has the shape of a skin diver watch with a really nice curve on the case side and lugs. And Seiko put this big polished chamfer running along the top edge of the case and lugs. I really like this. Then the bezel. It's fully graduated, which means it has markers and numerals all the way around. And even though the bezel insert is aluminum, the markers and numerals are imprinted or debossed or inset. Okay, now the dial, and I've been putting this off because I know some of you are mad. You're mad about the date window placement at 4:30. And I'm going to be clear, even at the expense of my subscriber count. I like this date placement. I prefer this date placement to the previous generation of the SPB divers. Yeah, I said it. What? Here's why I prefer it. I love the look of the classic 62 Moss and even the more accurate modern reissues. And one of the things I love about the 62 Moss design is that there's a big metal surround around the date window at 3 o'clock. There's a certain symmetry to having a metal rectangle at every hour, and the previous generation of the SPB divers never had that. At most, they had a small marker outside of the date window. It looked unbalanced to me. On these new watches, the symmetry is there and even stronger than on the original 62 Moss. The date at 4:30 is visible, it's legible, but it really allows the design to look cleaner and gives me more of those big chunky 62 Moss markers that I like. Now, would I like a no date option? Of course. This watch without a date would look even more gooder. But you should know by now that large watch brands, they just aren't going to give you exactly what you want. That would be silly. The sapphire crystal has a really nice dome, I think both internal and external domes. And it gives the watch a slight vintage distortion when you look at it from certain angles. I like that. It can mean that you get a lot of unwanted reflection, but it's not like you buy expensive watches to tell the time. You can be honest here, you're among friends. The lume on this is bright, just like with nearly every Seiko dive watch, but I found that, like myself in the afternoon, it tends to fade a bit quicker than I would prefer. But again, that symmetry of having the big marker at 3 o'clock, I'm telling you, I like this better than the date at 3 o'clock. The 6R55 movement is fine, I guess. 72 hours of power reserve is really good, but in typical Seiko fashion, it's not rated for really good accuracy, plus 25 to minus 15 seconds per day. This is a $1,300 watch. There are watches for less than this that have COSC certified movements. They're 4 times more accurate than this. I don't know why Seiko doesn't focus more on accuracy. To be fair, in my experience, Seiko watches are often pretty accurate, but the brand just doesn't promise that, and I get it. Under promise, over deliver, the opposite of what I do in my marriage. So for $1,300, is this new SPB453 worth it? Yeah, sure. Also, no, of course not. Also, maybe. If you like Seiko watches, if you like how this looks, if you're comfortable spending this kind of money on something that you don't need and you don't need it, then hell yes, this is great. You're going to enjoy this watch. I really do like this, especially the looks, and I guess I was kind of expecting to be bored by it. I'm often bored by simple black dive watches, but I really find this watch charming, so sorry about that. I guess it turns out that you might need this after all.